Danny.
Emily, what's up?
Not much. I had a pretty good day. How was your day?
You know, it's been good. I've got a lot of work done preparing for a new course we're teaching at the Well tonight. Just got offered $13,000 for my RAV4. It's a good day.
Are you getting a new car or are you just going to be carless?
Considering a new car.
Okay. That's exciting.
Yeah, electric car, potentially.
Okay, look at you. It's being so environmentally conscious, I guess.
You know me.
Well, today we're going to talk about purity culture, and I think it's going to be a good conversation. I almost wish we had someone else in the room on this podcast that we could talk to about it.
It'd be the dream.
If you had to pick someone, who would you pick?
Ooh, top 3. Dustin Bryson.
I knew you were going to say that.
My mom and my dad.
Well, if you asked me my top choice, I would say Sadie Merbarger, and she just happens to be right here.
All right, I'll go with my 4th option. Sadie, we'll go.
Sadie,
I didn't get a medal, but I am in top 4.
We're so excited you're here today. Tell us who you are. How do we know you?
Oh my gosh, hi. So I am the Wells token personality hire, but I also lead worship on Sunday, and I do our TikTok account.
Yeah, the pastor of TikTok.
The pastor of TikTok.
But that's so much more. You lead worship.
I do.
You engage people. You do a lot of fun stuff for us at the Well.
I sure do.
Yeah.
And including this podcast, but not limited to.
Yeah, and we have you here because I know you and I have talked about this before. You have a passion about the concept and the idea of purity culture, maybe deconstructing it. That's a lot of
loves it.
You love it.
I love it. I'm actually super pro purity culture.
Pro purity culture.
I don't know if you know this, Danny, but you're talking to 2 of the purest broads in all of St. Charles County.
Purest broads. Wi-Fi for that.
Thanks.
Well, hey, I'll probably never say that phrase ever again. But
good.
I would appreciate that if you didn't.
But so one of the things we've done through the course of this is we take things that people believe and we deconstruct them. We talk about where we're at. But purity culture, from my perspective, and I say this a lot, purity culture has damaged me the least in some way. I mean, it's impacted the way I believe a lot of things. And so that I've had to rework. But it doesn't impact me on a day-to-day basis. I'm the benefactor in some ways of what purity culture projects. But for a lot of people, men, women, anyone, straight, gay, whatever, this has been a catalyst for deconstruction. And so I think it'll be an interesting conversation as we talk about it. And so, but I don't know, where do we want to start? Emily, you have an idea of where we want to start with it?
Sorry, I want to know what you mean by that you're the benefactor of purity culture. What are the benefits that you reap because of purity culture?
Question. I mean, I think that in general, purity culture is a pretty patriarchal, male-driven thing, right?
Sure.
And so, when I say I benefit from it, I had a conversation with someone a while back, and she was asking about my thoughts, and I was like, yeah, I think it's a bummer and it's destructive, but I never had anyone really come up to me and talk to me about who I was having sex with and saving myself for marriage and all. Even if you look at books like I Kissed Dating Goodbye, it's and we'll probably talk about that maybe, but it's a male-driven story.
Yeah.
Right. And so for me, I've had a lot of negative things. I said to someone it impacted how I looked at women and how I spoke about them and the narratives. But it didn't negatively cast light on me. It just negatively impacted how I engaged with other people, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to start out by telling a story that happened to me when I was 14.
Love it.
Sure.
And this wasn't just for women. And I think later on we'll kind of talk about how purity culture affects different genders in different ways. We'll see. But so when I was 14, I also, mind you, I went to a public high school. This was not a
center.
Wasn't right. It wasn't. Well, we didn't have any in Albion, Illinois.
You should have seen Emily's face.
What was your face?
I was
yeah.
Yeah.
Oof, yeah.
It all makes sense.
Can't believe it really does. So, and this, what happened was, as we're 8th graders at this point when we're 13, 14. And there was this group that was putting on a day of training and also bonding because we're 2 grade schools that were going to consolidate as we go into high school. Okay. So they're trying to get us to bond as well as teach us to not do drugs and have sex and drink alcohol. So the people that were teaching us about this were the juniors and seniors in high school. And
the ones doing all the drugs and having all the sex.
Basically. And so they're a bunch of different rooms. Anyways, you get to the abstinence room, right? And
there's a room?
There's a room for abstinence.
What did it look like?
Well, there's not a bed in it, I'll tell you that.
Sorry.
Look. But so what happened was the students put on this skit, and basically they're supposed to represent 2 high schoolers and that they are about to have sex. So what they do instead of like having sex in front of 8th graders is which don't recommend, they exchanged Starburst, and they were like, all right, yeah, are you ready? Yeah. So they exchange Starburst, and then they chew it, and then they spit it out, and then they give it back to the owner. And then so one of them goes away, but then you follow the other person. I can't remember if it was the guy or the girl, but you follow them to their wedding day, right? They get married, it's so happy, and then it's their wedding night, right? And then they whip out their Starburst, because that's what you do on your wedding night, and they exchange it, and then one of the people they've been given this pure, brand new, straight from the store Starburst, and the other person is like so sad because their partner's Starburst was all chewed by somebody else, right? And also, this is a public school, and I'm 14. So we're going to fast forward to when I'm 21. And to make a long story short, I had sex with this guy, except I have no memory of it whatsoever. And he told me that it was consensual, so I just believed him. But as soon as I found that out, all I could think of was that my Starburst was now chewed.
Sheesh.
Yeah. And it would be a couple of months before I would realize that what happened to me wasn't consensual.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, just kind of like set the scene super dark.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
Just jump right in.
Well, I want to dive more into this, but we did a similar thing and that was in public school too. And so I think it's like we did the tape. And like you put on someone's arm and you pulled it and you went around the whole classroom and you saw what was a clean piece of tape. And by the end of it, it's like, if you have this many sexual partners, this is your soul.
What's the number that they're like, oh, it's kind of okay.
You're a little sticky until 7.
7.
Yeah, 7.
Very holy.
I know. So I'll just do my version of the tape story. Is this guy, my Bible teacher, had 2 like pieces paper people, and he was like, I love having sex with my wife, and he just did one staple, and he was like, I know her better than everyone. Another staple. Like, he's just talking about sex with his wife and like stapling and stapling and stapling, and then he's like, but imagine if like this is how bonded we are, and then he just like ripped the 2 people in half, and they were just shredded.
Yeesh.
So we're really into imagery and purity culture.
We really
which is
are.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, right? So it's like each of us has that memory, right? And for you, it's like, and which is an interesting thing maybe I want to unpack more as we talk about just purity culture, but it's like you had the moment in an instant where you were just like transported back in time. It's like not like you wanted to think about that.
Right.
And so like, as we're talking about purity culture and just the negative ramifications of it, like unpack that, like more of the mental space you're in that moment. Like how, like, are you just like bathed in shame? Are you just like upset? Are you like, well, I don't even know if I really think, like, what is your headspace, if the best you can remember as you're going through that?
Yeah, I think what the narrative that was told to me was that the only pure thing about me is the fact that I hadn't had sex before. And once that happens, like, I'm a chewed up Starburst. So it's kind of like, where do I go from here?
Was that like, sorry, let me go back.
Sure.
Were you told that based like, just because you, like, as a woman, your sexuality, that is the thing that you, or is like, are you saying there were other things like, well, I wasn't pure in these areas? Or is like the narrative and the rhetoric, like your sexuality and the pure,
was like the only pure thing that mattered.
Okay, that's really interesting. Yeah.
And I think that kind of, I don't know, goes back to, I think in my opinion, in the Old Testament, like you would get a higher dowry for a bride who is a virgin as opposed to one who is not. And so it ultimately I think that it boils down to what we value about another person. And I just think that, and I hope that we can just see each other's value as like more than who we had sex with.
And so like thinking about that headspace in that moment of when you're like, oh my gosh, my Starburst is chewed up. I wonder in that moment, who were you more like sorry to? Was it God or was it your future husband?
Oh, future husband for sure.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Because I feel like with like us girls at least, they emphasize like it's kind of to honor God, but it's really this gift you'll get to your husband.
I've never thought about that before, but it's really that like I wasn't really thinking, I mean, I was thinking a little bit of God's opinion, but it was more about like, oh no, my future husband, I wrote him a letter last year, you know, like,
yeah,
he's going to be so upset.
So like that's who we're really, it's so patriarchal. Like to
For sure, yeah.
go back to that, like it's all about, even like thinking about when we would talk about emotional purity. Did you ever talk about that?
I don't think so.
And it was like, if you think about another guy and he ends up marrying another woman, then you've thought about another woman's husband. And I was just like, not even sexually, just like crushing on them. Like, as like this emotional purity thing. And it was like,
That's a lot. Like I feel like you can't control that. Like, what are you supposed to think about? God,
can't.
That's it.
You just have to be like, if you're like, oh, I'm kind of crushing on this guy, you just gotta be like, he's gonna marry another woman. And
how are you supposed to court somebody if you're not allowed to have a crush on someone?
I mean, don't get me started. I mean, I think it's BS, but it was like, but it's this even like emotional purity of like, you have to save it for your like save all the love for your husband.
Yeah.
That's why people get married when they're like literally 18.
Because they're like, guess this is it.
Yeah.
Well, I just saw I just watched a snippet of a Driscoll sermon today, and it was about how men are kicking the can on masculinity, and the reason, like, he essentially, the crux of his argument was like, spiritually and emotionally mature men are getting married in their early 20s, and if you're 30 or later and you're not married, it's because you're immature. And I think that there's so much problematic about that.
Yeah.
But what he's saying underneath, to kind of tie into what we're talking about here, is it's like, he's essentially being like, to be the most mature man you can be, you have to like find your one. It's all about the man finding and the man driving. And so when I even talk about like purity culture being patriarchal, you get like sermons like this that are like, the man's job is the most mature thing he can do is find a woman, lock her down. And I made a response video. I was like, well, was married at 21, had kids at 25, and I have 1 divorce and 3 kids to show for it. So it's like, it doesn't mean that like I'm that much more spiritually mature. And like, I know, Dustin, you don't have a mic, but like you were married pretty young, like, and have gone through a divorce. And it's like the idea that like there's some level of maturity tied in with like bonding yourself to someone in marriage early is such a fallacy. But I do think, like, I went to Christian college and like people were trying to get their ring by spring and like get married. And it's like, the idea of like early marriage and early relationship was like a huge driver. And I think purity culture, even if you like had some healthy version of it, like at its core, it's about like the most Christian thing you can do is be clean and pure and holy and find someone to share your on-shoot starburst with. Like,
right. And then to immediately create a nuclear family within that. Yeah. And I think that's just like, so not even what even the authors of the Bible were about. Because I think it was, I don't know, Jesus said, like, deny your father and mother. Like, in comparison, you should hate your family into, like, how much you love me.
No, I'm just kidding.
Right? And I don't know. I think Jesus is already challenging that narrative of, like, kind of right now what the white evangelical church is doing. And they're just, like, idolizing this. And this is kind of going down a different road. But just idolizing this this nuclear family that, you know, one man, one woman, were pure up until marriage, and now they're just like, boom, kids. I don't think,
happens.
Right, boom, just like that. But I don't know. I just don't think that like that's what it's about. It being life, spirituality.
But I think like they get past all that, and they're like, just get to the nuclear family, get all that, because there's this book called Talking Back to Purity Culture by Rachel Joy Welcher. It's very good. And one thing she says is we've created this sort of purity prosperity gospel that says if you don't have sex until marriage, you're going to have a perfect family life.
And a perfect sex life, too.
Perfect sex life. And you'll be fertile. Like there are purity culture resources out there that are like, it will guarantee fertility or guarantee whatever if you've done this. And like,
my God.
That just isn't true. And and things happen. But again, it's like, but so what happens then is if, let's say you get married really young and it doesn't work out and you get divorced, then people are like, well, what did you not do purity-wise that messed this up? And it's this weird, there's so many levels of assumptions that people make about each other through purity culture and through, like, if they're married or not. Because, like, even if we would talk about, like, an older single guy in the church, I feel like there would be comments of, like, well, I'm sure he's just having sex then because men can't handle not having sex.
Yeah, they can't control themselves. And I think so obviously the purity culture, how it's been carried out, I guess, is really harmful to women in so many ways. But I think one of the ways that it's harmful to men, and then Danny, I guess you can speak into this as our resident man.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But like it limits you to just being this caveman almost, as though we're like, so we're supposed to cover up, we're supposed to like not do anything that could tempt you in any way. But like that's, I don't know, speaking a narrative over you that I hope isn't true for the entire male species.
It gives men no credit, right? To
Yeah.
be like the only way that it skirts the blame. Actually, it puts it all on women, because like women are the ones that are supposed to be responsible for my urges.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's essentially the thing. But it's also doing men a disservice to be like, you can't. But also it's like, if you look at it from a different perspective, what if that's what's being preached, and it is in a lot of evangelical conservative churches.
Yeah.
Really at the baseline, what I hear it saying is it's actually okay for you to have those, and it's the woman's role to subdue those for you. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so like I can't do anything to help my urges. Like they're going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's your job to help me not have those problems.
And that is rape culture.
Sure.
It's rooted in that. It's what was she wearing? It's like, well, a guy's got to figure out a way to like get his needs.
And I think I think purity culture and rape culture are probably intertwined more than most people agree with. And so here's a question I would have for the collective is,
That's us.
did you guys,
Wait, he's asking women what they think right now.
What's next? Women are going to vote.
I'm obviously pro deconstruction, right? Like we tear a lot of things down, right? And like that's a lot of this podcast. But I always say, like, and I've said this to you, Emily, before on the podcast, it's like we're not just doing this to eventually reconstruct, but I always want to say, like, what are we deconstructing to the point of, right? And so if we're like looking at purity culture as like this is a negative, and this is something that's had a lot of really harmful repercussions on men and women. I mean, we haven't even touched on how it impacts the LGBTQ community, right? Like there's a lot of that. But when you look, for both of you, like when you look at this, like what are we then trying to deconstruct to the end of, right? Like if we see this as the negative, from your perspective, like what do we then supplant it with as a healthy and maybe biblical model for relationships and sexuality and marriage and all that kind of stuff? I mean, maybe you don't have an answer. That's a big question, but
I mean,
I'll start to say very like generally, I think something that purity culture doesn't give you is then like no one has like creates any sort of like sexual ethic. Like it's like if it's like abstinence until marriage, then if you mess up a little bit and you're screwed, like then you've lost that label. Then after that, like it's almost like life after purity culture becomes like, well, sex is generally sinful, so then there's not like, who even cares if we're being thoughtful about it? So what I'm saying is I think in general, the future of, or the reconstruction of purity culture is a sexual ethic, whatever that ends up being for you.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I would kind of, maybe the idea that I would put out there is that I think it's maybe it's less objective and more subjective than what we would like to think. Because it's easy. Purity culture is easy in a way because it's very black and white, and there's not any wiggle room.
Before. Like that's one of the compelling things about evangelicalism is black and white.
You can have an answer for anything, but what I think, in my opinion, what I think maybe not a biblical but like a Christ-centric sexual ethic, because I think what evangelicalism often does is that we are less interested in our hearts and we're more interested in policing our bodies. This is it's kind of related. It's kind of related to some of like Richard Rohr's theology and stuff that I've read about him or from him. But I think that, at least for me, a positive sexual ethic will look less like policing my body, policing other people's bodies, and more like caring about my heart and also caring about my partner's heart, whoever it is.
Yeah.
Because that's like, I mean, let's go back to like the sin episode where you had this very eloquent definition of sin, which is it's something that tears me away from God and other people. And I think sex can definitely be used to tear us away from God and from other people.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. There's very harmful and destructive ways to like engage in sexuality. I don't think it's as black and white as like abstinence till marriage and then you completely rid sin from sexuality.
Yeah.
I think it's I think it's more complex than that.
Right. Because, I mean, this is kind of dipping a little bit into the LGBTQ conversation. Is like, I've been asked before, is all homosexuality pleasing to God? And I say, like, in a similar way to all homosexual sex, I think that it can be
Heterosexual sex?
yeah, whatever. Heterosexual sex can be good or it can be harmful. I think homosexual sex can be good or it can be harmful, like, to people's hearts, I think. And I think it's more about mindfulness. I think it's more about treating the other person not as an object, but as a soul. But dare I say, I don't think that it has to be in the confines of marriage.
Yeah. Well, that's a great segue. Thank you for that. So here's an interesting question, because like the church has preached a long time, right, about saving yourself for marriage and sex outside, like very anti-premarital cohabitation, premarital sex, all that kind of stuff. And with that in mind, and just overall this whole topic, like, what do you guys perceive the church's role within this to be? Like, so because I think about this a lot, like I'm a pastor, and so I have a flock and a congregation, and I want to be intertwined in their lives and be able to add guidance, and I want to be able to add perspective, and I want to be able to add wisdom where I can. But where do you see the church's role with them? Do you think it's like, hey, what happens in your sexual life is your business? Or do you think the church has something to say about it? Like, because if we're deconstructing purity culture and saying like, that's probably not what the church should be saying. Should the church be projecting anything from your perspective?
I think, so my first immediate response to you is like, in general, I would lean toward you don't have to bring it up, because I think evangelicalism kind of like it says everything is on the table and you owe your spiritual leader every part of your story. Yeah. And like, I was talking to someone recently who was saying that she like kind of left faith for a time and came back and was like meeting with a pastor, and he was asking a lot of very personal questions about her sex life, as if he had the right to that. And I don't really think that. I think it can get inappropriate, and I think we've lost any sense of like something that maybe a pastor doesn't have the right to ask you. Can I say that?
Well, especially in the evangelical space, like because I have my own thought on the engagement. I can talk more about it after you say, but I would say like, I can't even imagine sitting in my office. I don't have an office, but if I had one, with a woman in the congregation, be like, can I talk to you about your sex life? Like, that seems pretty out of bounds. But in the evangelical world, it's pretty inbounds.
You almost have to ask it.
Yeah. So I was a resident at a church, and we were doing vocal auditions for the worship team. And I don't even know how it got brought up, but some girl mentioned that she like lived with her boyfriend, and like that was a conversation that they immediately had right after. And it was one of the reasons, not the main reason, like she wasn't particularly gifted in the vocal department, but that was like, even if she was, I don't think that she would have been on the worship team. And that's something that I have taken, and I've been like, this is what I'm not going to do as a worship pastor, is like, I'm not going to make it my business if someone lives with a partner outside of marriage. I think that we should be, again, like, caring about hearts and caring about souls. And so if someone is like not damaged, maybe bad word, but like if someone was harmed or abused in a way, then I think that like we need to provide like a safe space for that. Sure. Yeah. So I think it's like, it's not, don't talk about it. Like, I don't really like that narrative either.
Me neither. But I think that's it, right? It's like, what would it look like for spiritual leaders to say, let's bring some questions up and maybe ask some thoughtful questions rhetorically and generally, maybe not one-on-one. These are like very specific questions, but to say like we did a series on Song of Solomon at the Well, and like, we haven't not brought up sex, but it hasn't been this like, this is the most important thing about you and your walk with God. It's been like sex matters to God, so it matters to us, and it matters to be thoughtful about it. But it's not like, if you asked me to sit down and say like, what does the Well tell me to do with my sexuality, I wouldn't know what to say. Which I think is good. Like, you know what I'm saying?
I think it's good too. And I think, well, especially because I'm pretty sure I know for a fact that Danny and I have different like opinions on like a sexual ethic. And because we've talked about it before, I was like, listen.
True statement.
Right. Because like I think that if someone is being respected and consent is there, then like I don't see a problem with sex before marriage. But I have a friend who, and it's less of a shame conversation, and it's less of a I'm damaged if I do have sex. It's more of a like, he views once two people have sex that they are like way too involved with one another if they're not married. And I've told him, I was like, if that is true for you, and then I say, absolutely, please have that sexual ethic, like in your own life. Because what I don't want to do is kind of like shame or say, oh, so sweet, if someone wants to like save themselves from marriage. I think they absolutely should do that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, like from my perspective, and this is coming from someone that like has my own history of sexual experiences like in my life, right? And so that shades part of what I believe. But I'm just interested because I think that and you said this right, like there's sex is a wonderful thing, but it can be sinful or it can be helpful, right? And there's lots of ways that it can tear us apart from God and from one another. And I think that's where I look at it from my perspective as just a human, but as a pastor and as someone that loves Jesus. Like there's ways in purity culture, to tie it into that, has like created a bad ethic maybe, like, or a really shameful one. Yeah. But there's a way to think about it, like if we have the freedom in Christ to do all things, but not all things are edifying and helpful. It's like, how do we figure out how to engage sex and sexuality in a way that is really helpful, especially if like sex is something that God designed us for. And the problem is like rarely do we have conversations that are helpful like this that aren't shame driven, right? Like rarely can you have disagreement, can you have difference of opinions, but it's something that God designed us for and for people to do and for people that are committed to one another to engage in, right? I think there's a level to say like, how are we creating space that doesn't shame people, but pushes people to a preferred end, if that makes sense? Like, I don't know that anyone, and maybe you guys would disagree. Like, I don't know that you guys would or wouldn't. So tell me if you disagree. But like best case scenario, like you would have your lifelong partner, that would be the person that you shared that moment with, right? Like that you were having
solely.
Well, I mean, ideally, like I'm not the kind of person like I need to have sex with 14 women before I meet my wife so I can be just awesome at it. So it's like, if that's not your narrative, then I don't know why you would try to have sex with as many people as you could. But I wouldn't shame. Like I know people. I had sex before marriage. I know people that are wonderful people. I know people that haven't, that are terrible people. Right. So it's not like a one for one. But I think the idea in it is like, if this is the best possible outcome because it's like the least destructive, maybe, because that's where I see it. Like I don't subscribe to my tape thing that they did to me like in middle school where I had all this like dirty tape. But I do know that like the people that I engage with outside of marriage before I met my wife, like there's baggage that you bring in, and I wish there are times where like I wish I could have undone that. You know what I mean? And so I think there's a level of saying like, what is the best potential, but not shaming people for not living into that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. And I kind of want to pass it off to Emily, who's our like embodiment queen. I think that something that I love that Emily talks about. She talks about like how things feel in her body. So like that's, in my opinion, I think like that's how you kind of check yourself, and not check yourself, but check in with your body, with your heart, and be like, hey, is this edifying to me? Like, do I want to do this as, whatever, if you're gonna like hook up with someone or whatever. Who's going downhill fast, but not downhill. But I think that, for me, I think that having positive sexual experiences has been healing to someone like me who has sexual trauma. So I didn't want to, so if I have a positive experience, then like that is me on my healing journey. Not like once I have a partner one day, that's not damaging. It's actually been helping me heal.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I want to hit on in this like embodiment and healing thing, and kind of something that Danny hit on too, is you were like, I had experiences that looking back, I'm like, dang, maybe I wish that wouldn't have happened. But that is something that we don't offer in purity culture, is any sense of trial and error.
Sure.
It is. You mess up one time and you're done.
Yeah. You're dirty, you're cast off.
So I think there is something to be said too about the fact that like maybe you have sexual experiences and then you decide that's something that I want to wait for my spouse. You're not like completely ruined. You had an experience and then you like adjusted and figured out your new sexual ethic. And again, another person is involved and there is like, we have to be thoughtful and you can't just be like, I'm just figuring it out and just hurt a bunch of people. Right. But there's something to be said about the idea of like listening to our bodies sometimes includes trial and error. And when I was like deep in purity culture, my body was my enemy because especially I'll say as a woman, I was told that women don't really have sexual feelings. And so then when I was like feeling some type of way, I was like, I guess I'm crazy and the only girl like,
right.
And so that's tricky, right?
Well, because we're told that we are the object that men lust after, but women ourselves don't have those feelings of lust, which obviously is not true.
And we're going to hate it, but like then that means our husband won't leave.
Yeah.
Like for lack of better terms, like that was said to me in church.
Oh geez. Can I quote a Gilmore Girls? Do we have to like
So what a bummer.
Yeah, honestly.
She goes, I mean, this woman was like, sometimes I don't want to have sex, but like I serve my husband by giving it to him, and then he won't like be thinking about
other women.
Jeez. And I was like, there's so much wrong with that. So.
Yeah. I think, because like,
Gilmore Girls?
Gilmore Girls reference. So Lane gets married to Zach, and her mom, who's a Korean woman, they're Seventh-day Adventists, yes. So Lane sits down with her mom, and her mom, Mrs. Kim, is like, Lane, it's time that we finally had this talk. So she's like, the wedding night, you'll have to do certain things. And she says, if you're lucky, you only have to do it once. Just like me.
Oof.
Right? So, and like that, I think that kind of, we're told it's a duty, that it's just something we have to do because we're this sexual object that's pleasing to men, but there's no like pleasure involved for women.
And can I say that is
in a very heterosexual, normative.
Sure.
But also that is some women's experience when there's so much shame. There's a lot of struggles in that like, women are like, oh, well, it's so bad. And then all of a sudden you get married and you're supposed to be like,
flip a switch.
Fine. Like, I remember someone told me a story that she was telling me about her wedding night. And she was like, I remember waking up in the same bed as my husband and immediately feeling like, oh my gosh, like we did something wrong. And then remembering like we're married, so it's fine. Like that doesn't go away in a day.
No, absolutely not. Like I went to a Christian university, and one of my friends, when I was a freshman, one of my friends, not also a freshman, but a few years older than me, got married. And she was saying that, like, sometimes when we're having sex, I feel violated. Like, because that's just what, like, she's had all these negative connotations about sex her entire life up until the point of being married. Like, that doesn't go away. And I think that's another negative ramification of purity culture.
Yeah, I think it makes it even more important for us to, like, and that's why I think this conversation is important, right? The reason we talk about it is to try to replace it with something that's much more life-giving.
Right.
And realizing there's some, I mean, you guys have both talked about a sexual ethic, meaning that there presumably needs to be one, right?
Yeah,
so, like,
definitely.
So the idea is like figuring out how we create something that's life-giving and all of that. And I think finding grace is really important, right? Like the idea that we are not the sum of all of our mistakes, right? I think that's really important. And, but also, like, one of my favorite comedians is like, he says, Jesus died for your sins, so get your money's worth, right? And so, but the idea is like, then if not the saying having sex before marriage, like, I'm not speaking into that, but like the other way to look at that is like, just because I can have sex with many people as I want, like, and I find grace in that, doesn't mean you probably should. Does that make sense? And so it's like, where is the middle ground between freedom and an ethic that isn't like
harmful?
Yeah, that isn't harmful and overlaced with shame. Because I think there's a lot of different areas that people are provided grace and provided freedom and provided stability and walked alongside. And for whatever reason, like, I'm sitting here right now listening, and like, you guys, I mean, you had like a little 5-minute powwow without me for a second. You guys are just talking to each other. But I'm like, this is a deeply uncomfortable conversation for me. And it's not because I like it, the conversation itself doesn't make, but as a pastor and as a male in Christianity, like, having conversations about sex that aren't just like prescriptive, like the Bible says this and do it.
Right.
We are not trained to do that. And so I enjoy a space like this because it's creating more dialogue and openness, but it's not something that as Christians or pastors, many of us are trained to do well, is to talk about sex and sexuality with any level of spirituality or emotional awareness. And like, it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I'm super uncomfortable right now. Like this conversation.
I
Like,
feel
think,
super comfortable.
which I love that. I think we need that presence. But mine, like, it's not that I'm uncomfortable talking about it, but I'm so used to having these conversations in the shadows.
Oh, yeah.
And this
or
is
with
very,
someone who's kind of like
be
opposing
like,
you
"What?"
instead, or
No, just to like someone to be like, well, I'm kind of struggling with this, and then people being like, oh yeah, me too, just no one says anything, and then you're like, oh, okay, cool, like,
Yeah.
And so this is very open, but I think like again, what you're saying with the shame and kind of what I was going back to is like, to me, the big thing that will take away shame is if we don't make it such a permanent part of your identity. If you make a mistake in the sexual ethic, or if your sexual ethic changes, like it's this complete lack of trial and error in the like context of sex that I think can be so damaging. Like, let's say I get blackout drunk, okay, and then I'm like, oh dang, like maybe that wasn't the best choice for me, and maybe that didn't lead to great things. No one's like, well, Emily lost her drinking virginity, and like, you know what?
I think it's a
but
really
you
good
know what I'm
analogy.
saying though,
Yeah.
is like people are just like, oh, you messed up, but it's like, I don't get blackout drunk, and I'm like, I hope my husband doesn't get mad at me.
Yeah.
My future person, who I have not yet committed to, by the way, but yet I'm expected to like be
Act like you are.
yeah. You even look at like, I mean, Jesus obviously, I say obviously, I think you can look at the words of Jesus and he has an ethic that he's putting out and he's teaching to away. But also whenever he engages with people that are outside of that, they're always met with grace. They're always met, and that their identity is not what they did. It's that they are known and loved by God. And I think that's the hard part about this, is that we let our morals define the human and not what God says about us define us, right? So it's like, you are the person, you're the girl that had sex with all these guys, you're the guy that had sex with all, like, you are the sum of what you did, not who God says you are. And I think that's what's really damaging.
Because think about, like, I think that is, oh my gosh, I feel like this is it. Like, I feel like we figured out the answer to what church should do. I feel like I'm serious. So, like, I'm thinking about the woman at the well. Women at the well, baby.
That's sorry, Danny.
Not the church, the Bible story.
Oh, okay.
I definitely want to call our women's ministry Women at the Well, though. Like, that's hilarious.
Yeah,
okay, anyway. So, but what I was trying to say is, let's, like, think about Jesus meeting that woman who she was, you know, she had 5 husbands, and the woman that, I mean, and the man the man she was with now was not her husband. And so Jesus is just vibing with her, and she's like, oh yeah, I'm not married. And he's like, yeah, you've had 5 husbands and you're living with someone right now. He doesn't like slut shame her. I mean, like, you know, and he's not like, you're a hoe. Like,
But he's also truthful about what's happening.
But he's like, this is the real deal. And,
right?
Well, no, he says,
Like,
everyone who drinks in this well will be thirsty again, but I offer living water. He does not say, go leave the guy you're with right now, move out, stop having sex with him. He just says, I'm not really sure. He points out to her, clearly something's not satisfying you. And there is something that does satisfy. Yeah. That is what he freaking says.
So you're super into that TikTok from that Bachelor woman that's going viral right now? Have you seen that one?
No.
Oh, that's like, Jesus is the only true thing that can satisfy, and people will stitch it
that's
like,
not what I'm trying
but
to say.
what about the Taco Bell $1 menu, you know?
But I'm saying he asked thought-provoking questions about her sexual ethic.
Yeah.
That is what Jesus freaking did.
Yeah. Because I think
pretty interesting.
We can kind of go back to, like, it's more about, purity is less about the specific actions and more about, like, your heart, how it's affecting you.
Yeah.
I think a parallel can kind of be drawn there. Like, hypothetical situation, if someone is going out and, like, sleeping with someone different every night, but what they're trying to do instead is trying to fill a void, like, that I think in my opinion, would be a negative sexual act, only because they're using sex as a distraction for something deeper.
Yeah, I mean, I just had a conversation with someone in a similar vein about, like, what is the motivation behind the relationships that they're, and I think that motivation is important, right? Is that, are you pursuing sex to fill, like, an emptiness that you have, like, or like, I feel like I'm not enough of a person, or like, I'm sad, like, there's some level of brokenness, right? That if, like, you're only pursuing that, and so that's the question I think you have to ask yourself. And so, not you, I wasn't like, but you were the one I was thinking about. So a question.
Yes,
so Sadie, I usually ask this to Emily, but I want to ask it to you. Like, But I want you to answer it as well, Emily.
Yeah.
But like in this conversation, sometimes it can be discouraging, right? Like we're like deconstructing, and like a lot of people get really bummed out by deconstruction because they're like they see the rubble, and it can be daunting. So where's the hope in this conversation for you? Like as we're talking about like, hey, we're deconstructing the negativity of purity culture, and I know we've talked a little bit about the idea of reconstructing an ethic, but like where do you see the hope for the listener that's really struggled with their perspective or what they've been told on purity culture as that relates to their relationship with Jesus and with the church? Because I think that's one of the things we're restoring, hopefully, is a connected relationship with the church where the church is really cashed in some relational chips they maybe didn't have.
Right.
And there's a debt at this point.
Right. Well, I think the hard part is there's not like an easy 5-step plan to just being completely free from all purity culture, guilt, and shame. But I know for me, it's looked like years of therapy, a lot of reprocessing of trauma, relearning like what does purity mean as opposed to like individual acts, as opposed to like my heart, how I'm feeling about myself, about my body, about the relationships that I am having. And really just like constantly kind of checking in with myself. And because I think like that type of knowing yourself is also knowing God, if I'm allowed to say that.
Heck yeah. Say it, girl.
Yes. Yeah. But the more that you can check in with yourself and actually think like, okay, is this something that I'm feeling because it was told to me my entire life? Or is it actually something that I think God is teaching to me?
That's a great question.
It's kind of like taking every thought captive, dare I say. Dare I quote some scripture. But I couldn't even tell you where it's from. Taking every thought captive, it's somewhere.
Probably Paul.
Probably Paul. Sounds very Paul.
Or Peter? Kind of feels Petery. Whatever.
It feels more Paul to me.
Comment it.
But I don't know. I think that's hopeful to me, and that's what has provided my own healing from sexual trauma, figuring out my own sexual ethic. Like that's what's been helpful to me. And it's hard because it's not going to be prescriptive for everybody.
Sure.
But I think
sharing your story is helpful, right?
Yeah, I hope that it's helpful for people. Yeah. What about you, Emily?
I think the hope, I'm just going to be 100% honest and say what came to my mind when you asked this question. Bear with me.
You had a sassy look on your face when I was saying it, so is this going to be sarcastic?
No. But I was just like, this is a dumb answer, but it's working for me. So like, I've been thinking about the Starburst story and how, and multiple full circle ending. Yeah. And how, like, I know a lot of, I'm going to say specifically women, but I'm sure men too, like have this story of like being something that's chewed up or eaten or used or as if we're something to consume. And like, I just kept thinking about the animal, the skink. Which when its tail,
it's not landing.
I know, I know, and that's why I was like, I warned you. But so it's this animal with a blue tail, and then when it gets attacked, like if it gets attacked by the tail rips off, but then it grows a new tail. And I was thinking about like, what if we really saw ourselves as like beautiful and regenerative, and not just as like something that's chewed up once, like something to consume once. Like to me, that is somehow that we're skinks.
Yeah, we're skinks, not skanks. We're going to put that on a shirt. I've been waiting to say it since you started the story.
Oh, God. We can be a skank if you want to be.
I want that.
Put that on a t-shirt.
That made me so happy.
I felt pretty good about it. Well, Sadie, this has been a really fun conversation. I really do appreciate your perspective. We laugh a lot on this show, but this has been a topic that I find hard to laugh at, but you've added some levity to it, and I think it's been fun, and so we appreciate you. But with that, Emily, do you want to send us out as you always do?
Yeah, thanks for listening. Thanks, Sadie, for being here, and as always, embrace the journey.
Oh, I didn't know.
Way late to that, man.
Right.
It's fine.
Well, I didn't know this.
I like
was
your
part
shimmy.
of it.
I like your shimmy. Wait, do you not watch the show?